Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Untold Radio Network. If you love tales of werewolves and wolfman or dogman or whatever they're called today, you're going to love tonight's episode. We're taking a look at the latest documentary from Seth Breedlove and Small Town Monsters, the DOGMAN Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State. What did Jason and I think of the reality of werewolves and dogmen? What do we think of Texas? After all, Jason is a Texan and I have family there. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about a heck of a lot more too tonight on Mysterious Library.
Good evening, everyone, whether you're listening on audio podcast or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or anywhere else in the digital realm. Welcome to another episode of Mysterious Library. We're going to be talking about, again, as Dr. Dean mentioned, the Dogman Triangle, Dogman here in Texas. Yes, I do have a few thoughts on the great state of Texas. Mostly that Californians should leave. But that's a conversation for a different show. I'm kidding. No, I'm not. But yeah, no, it's a great week. Dean, anything interesting happened to you while we were between episodes?
Probably several things, but something interesting happened tonight. My poor cat, I don't know if I've mentioned on the show, I know I've mentioned it to you, Jason, has been like just weirdly creeped out. He's kind of an outside barn cat who just showed up here one winter. So my daughter and I fed him, put a little box out for him on the porch, and then he hung around. So we let him live in our garage. But he's a lovely cat. He gets on very well with us. And he's normally super friendly and he does a great job at keeping the local mouse population down. So he earns his keep aboard. But he's had this, like, he's been creeped out by his own shadow lately, like just genuinely scared. He hadn't come home. He was staying in the woods around our house, just wouldn't come back. He's been here for a few years as well, to contextualize it. Anyway, I thought I want him to come in and sleep inside tonight because he's been living rough, even though it's summer for a few nights. Plus, I wouldn't mind putting out a live trap again just to see if there's something creeping him out at nights out there, which I've caught things in live traps here before. I lived in rural America. So I called him, found him in the woods, carried him back, put him in the garage, and he just, like, his claws just, popped out. He just jumped down. He fled off. And it occurred to me, I wonder if there's something in our garage. Because lately, whenever he's been in there, he's kind of been hiding and he's been acting super weird. And I thought, well, I'll put a live trap in there just in case there's something hiding in the garage. There might be a small, like there might be a big rat, or there might be who knows what. I mean, I've got a pretty big garage. There's areas where critters could hide. But then I remembered a story I told some time ago where my daughter had seen something weird run into the pumpkin patch. She said it was black, and she knows it was squirrels and things.
Yeah.
I couldn't define. Yeah, you probably remember the story.
Yeah, you told me about the story.
Yeah, and I remember one day going into the garage, calling the cat who would normally come, and then he shot out something little and black, like I bet half the size of the cat, shot out from behind my truck and ran down towards the basement door is. But the door, it's a dead end unless the door's open. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. And then I saw the cat flee out after it and run down as well. And I went and looked, and the cat was just looking down the stairs. There was nothing there. So I thought, I wonder if there's some weird ghostly apparition in my garage which is freaking out this cat. Probably not, but I thought it'd be something mysterious to share with the card holders of Mysterious Library.
Well, there you go. Maybe get one of the goblins to go take a look. They're really good at grabbing weird things.
Good point. Unless it is one of the goblins.
Particularly, unless it is, well, usually goblins are a little bit easier to see. I mean, but get one of the ones from nonfiction, because the fiction ones tend to be a little flaky, right? The research goblins are pretty good. Like they're really on point. So maybe get one of them. You never get the elves. Never use the elves. They are so freaking lazy. Goblins got work ethic. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. The gnomes are pretty good as well, but the gnomes probably aren't vicious enough to deal with the situation, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, like they're industrious, but they're not going to go chasing after something. That's what I'm saying. Like you need that balance of industriousness and willing to sink, their little claws onto some unknown critter. Gnomes know better than to do that.
Might as well get one of the little fellas to moonlight as the guardian of my garage, seeing that my cat seems incapable of the job these days.
Yep.
Poor Valet. He's a good cat.
So you actually have a book to present, don't you?
I do, and it's a little bit
our main topic.
Absolutely. It's a little bit outside of the realm of Forteana, but it's actually it's written by a regular viewer of the show who's also written things closer to Forteana, who's been on Talking Weird a couple of times. You've talked to him, I've talked to him.
Yes.
And that is, of course, the one and only Professor Horace Smith. And his most recent book is Cruel War and Cursed Rebellion, The Civil War Letters of Samuel Bliss. There's a photo
Interesting.
of the shelves of my Civil War library. Horace was kind enough to send me a copy. I haven't read it yet, but it looks fantastic. I would encourage anybody to go to Amazon and pop Horace Smith's name into the search engine there. And he's got other books on, various UFO type flaps or various weird astronomical occurrences. And he writes really well. His stuff's all super accessible. Horace is a great guy. He's also got a book coming out on Lovecraft and astronomy soon, which I can't wait to get my...
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. That's the one I'm really going to... Well, we need to review that one for the show, for this show specifically.
Absolutely. But what about you? I didn't ask what you've been up to, Jason. I just babbled about my cat and goblins.
Honestly, the bulk of my time that hasn't been on like the channels has been working on the fence. So this really won't apply to anything that we're going to talk about tonight, but North Texas specifically, since we're talking about Texas, sits on a limestone slab. And because of that, a lot of the soil in my area is very, very rocky. Well, we had our fence replaced some, like a year or two ago, and two of the metal posts we had put in, because the original builders, they didn't even concrete them in, but they used wooden posts, just rotted out. So we went with metal posts, concrete in, but they couldn't get down far enough, and so the fence started leaning after the last couple of years because the soil moves, right? Because it's clay, and of course Texas, it gets really cold for like 2 weeks in the winter, and it gets really wet and moist in the spring, and then it gets really hot and dry in the summer. So the soil shifts a lot. So these things have just been leaning. So we propped them up. I dug out from around them and filled them with concrete. And there was this shenanigans with the guy who we hired to stain the fence, and so I've been fixing that, and mostly yard work. And that in associated phenomena, I suppose.
You're as industrious as a gnome yourself. Look at you being all handy.
I try to be. I try to be. I've turned over a leaf in my life. Like I've lost over 70 pounds and going for another, honestly, 100-ish. Again, depends on muscle mass and all that. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to, it's like I've spent so much of my life saying, well, I'm going to focus on these things and do all this other stuff, tomorrow. And I just find it's like, well, tomorrow never really comes. So it's like, find it, do it, get it done. You're happier. I'm working on a whole mind, body, spirit, so just get healthy all the way around kind of a thing.
You're looking great, man. Whatever you're doing, you're hitting all the right notes. You're looking super healthy.
Thank you. Probably another 20 pounds. I'm gonna have to buy a few more shirts.
That's always a good thing. It's nice when you lose weight and you can't wear things because they're too baggy. It's always terrible when it goes the other way. It's like, these jeans used to look so good on me in my 30s. Now I can't button them up, But going the other way, it's like, I can leave that, double extra large on the shelf. I don't have to wear it anymore or whatever. I mean, that's always up. That's always a good feeling.
Yep. Nope. Right there with you. Like I said, I do feel a lot better. But yeah, I have found that doing these little things around the house, it's even a mood boost because you're like, I can see it get done, right? It's done, and there's that sense of accomplishment, and it's, I think a lot of us fall into the category of we allow our lives to live us versus the other way around, and I'm trying to fix that. So, it is what it is.
And there's Horace Smith just joined us now, who we mentioned his Cruel War and Cursed Rebellion earlier in the show. Thank you for joining us, Horace. It's always great to see you. As it's great to see Joe and Ken and Bridget and Tea Time. So many lovely folks always come and say hi. Please come and say hi in the chat and ask any questions tonight as well. We'd love to hear.
Oh yeah,
from what you think or what you might like us to chat about, or your own thoughts on the documentary, or your own thoughts on Dogmen and Werewolves. Don't be shy. Come and say howdy.
Yep. Real quick, though, before we get into this, there is actually a special event. It's actually a virtual Sasquatch convention coming up, and we're going to run the ad for it right now. And I'm actually really excited for this. I know Dean is as well. So let's debut that commercial now.
Are you ready to uncover the mysteries of Bigfoot? Join us for Squatchcon Idaho 2023. This year, we're bringing the magic directly to your screen, or join us in person. Witness the world premiere of the enhanced Paul Freeman Bigfoot footage. Doug Hychek discovered a secret within this enhanced video you'll have to see to believe. Hear from an all-star panel of Bigfoot experts like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, Cliff Barackman, Brian King-Sharp, and Michael Freeman. But that's not all. Get exclusive online bonuses such as Bigfoot-themed wallpapers, a Bigfoot coloring book, an interactive Bigfoot quiz, Squatch Nut Field Guide, get a copy of the Freeman Bigfoot Files ebook, and more. Whether you attend in person or watch it live online, you'll be part of an unforgettable experience. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Secure your spot today. Squatchcon Idaho 2023. Step into the unknown.
Looks so good. I'm going to jump into the online version. I'd love to get to Idaho, but it's difficult for me to travel with my little girl. Plus, I'm so busy with my own documentary in the moment. But I'm going to go and watch that online for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think I'm very much in that same situation as far as being able to head off to Idaho. But that would be a cool thing to attend in person. But that's the beauty of this, is if you can't attend in person, you can do it. You can do it virtually. Like, this is the same technology. I'm glad to see people are taking this technology that we're using and taking and expanding it out and making these things accessible to the broadest number of people. There's so many things that happen at these conventions that are just so utterly unique, and if you're not there, you miss it. So I'm really glad that this is a thing that's being addressed now by the community, so we can sort of further these ideas and these conferences. It's a great thing. A lot of really interested to see this.
By the way, I was never really into the online conference thing until I started attending Strange Realities every year, which is, where is it? It's like in is it Georgia? It's somewhere in the South. I don't even know where it is.
I
It's almost
couldn't tell you.
impossible for
Yeah.
me to get to.
Enough
But
time
that's a
ahead.
great conference. And when it's funny, you really feel
Mhm.
part of it, even when you do it virtually. Like I buy tickets online and you can comment, people engage with you, and you
Mhm.
get to be almost buddies with the other people who are watching.
Yeah.
I mean, virtually as well as in person.
Mhm.
So I think the course of the technology, as you were saying, it's made it far more engaging than it would have been if you just, watched, I don't know, a lecture on television 20 years ago.
Even a few years ago,
Yeah,
like even a
even
few
you're
years
right,
ago,
even a
this
few years
technology
ago.
wasn't really where it needed to be for this. So yeah, I'm really excited for this. So I'm going to throw out a few things real quick on this documentary, not as a name drop, but just for full disclosure. Obviously, I know Ken and Lyle and Nick personally. Tex, I also know very personally for obvious reasons. As I was his co-host for a couple of years on Texas Front Porch and was on the, I'm still technically on the channel. We've just sort of broken up our channels respectively. But I'm still guest hosting there all the time, that kind of thing. And of course, I love Seth Breedlove's work. I still think Terror in the Skies is probably the best cryptozoological documentary made, definitely over the last 20 years, if not ever. So I just want to put my biases on the table. And of course, Texan, But I just want to front load that before we get into the actual conversation about the film.
Yeah, I don't know.
Dean,
I don't know. I don't know any. Just to put my biases out there, I don't know many
Mm-hmm.
personally, but I like a lot of them. I mean, I've had them on my shows and I've
Yeah.
chatted to them, and people like Lyle have been helpful
Mhm.
in my own research. I screened a very early film of Seth Breedlove's. It's how I first
Mhm.
met him and how I first became aware of Lyle Blackburn. Actually, was when we screened his Boggy Creek documentary at Midwest Weird Fest in year one, which I think was only the third film Seth had
Yeah.
made, and maybe only the first almost feature length one he'd made. So it was super early in his career. And I've always been a big fan of the Small Town Monsters content because it seemed to separate itself, particularly then when there were less people probably in the space. There are more and more now, which is a wonderful thing. But Small Town Monsters is still near the top. But it was so different to watching most of the exploitative television shows that were like, have they found Bigfoot? We'll find after the break. Seth never played it that way. He always played it with really cool researchers telling, interesting stories and interviewing witnesses, and it never plugged it as something that it wasn't. It never pretended that they were going to give us the great secret after the ads, so it felt so refreshing when they started doing this almost 8 years ago or more now, and it still feels like that. It still feels refreshing. So yeah, that's my, if I have a bias, that's mine. Probably not as closely involved with a lot of the people as you are, but I'm a big fan of their content.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing I love about Seth's work is it always has a very genuine and natural feel to it. Even when they did that one where it was like their takeoff on was I think it was Momo, where they sort of did their own like 70s horror, schlock film.
And Bobo was like a sheriff or something in it. That's all I remember.
Yeah. I love Lyle's role in that one. Lyle normally does the voiceovers for most of their films. He does it in this one because this one's a little bit different. It's more like what we when we reviewed the last the one that came out on their YouTube channel about the UFO cult. It's more in that vein, right, of a straight up documentary.
Well, Eli Watson, who directed who does those Monsters and Mysteries episodes on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel and did that UFO cult one that you were talking about. It's recently done an Adamski one, which is worth checking out as well, because they interview Glenn Steckling, the head of the George Adamski Foundation. Now, I know Glenn. I don't necessarily think Adamski's claims were physically real, but I've always been as open to that as any abduction story. So it was wonderful to see Glenn actually get some time in a relatively, mainstream context. But Eli Watson edited this film, and I think he did a great job. So there's a lot of people who are talented in that small network of filmmakers who are Small Town Monsters.
Yeah, no, and again, my broader point was just, Lyle isn't narrating this one like he does mostly, but I did love that Momo one where he sort of plays I don't even know what you'd call it, sort of like the old school narrator for B movies on television, right? Like I think it's
Right,
Me
I
TV.
remember.
They have Sven Gulli, right? Like you used to have the old guy who'd show up and on some local station, he'd dress up like Dracula or whatever in a suit, and he'd talk about the movie, and then they'd cut to this Godzilla or monster movie from the 50s. I grew up in that kind of stuff because Channel 27 used to be independent, so they had stuff like that, and Mystery Science Theater 3000, that's where I was introduced to it on. So yeah, that one was really great. And again, they had that sort of very real love for that concept and idea.
It's hard to
So
do.
again,
By the way, it's very hard to do real. It's hard to do that
yes.
homage stuff to 70s
Mhm.
cinema. I mean, a great example of a failure of it, I think, would be Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a 70s movie at all. His follow-ups,
Not at
which are
all.
brutal, do, like the next one, which is The Devil's Rejects, as nasty as that is, and I'm certainly not recommending anybody who doesn't like that type of content to watch it. That feels like a 70s grindhouse movie. His first one, which was pitched, House of a Thousand Corpses, that was pitched as a 70s grindhouse movie, doesn't feel
wasn't.
for a second like a 70s grindhouse movie. Momo does a better job of feeling like a 70s grindhouse movie, but it's so hard to pull off well. I prefer the Small Town Monsters stuff where it's straight down the middle, to be honest. Quickly too, that book, that film, the Momo one, was based on Lyle Blackburn's Momo book.
Yes.
That book is spectacular. It's such it's a fast, fantastic read, and man, that thing feels like you're right back there in the 70s. It just feels like you can smell the 70s in the air when you read Lyle's book.
I love it. You can smell the 70s in the air. What did the 70s smell like, Dean?
Well, there were a lot of hippies there, so there wasn't a whole lot of deodorant. But there was this, where there was the smell of, which is better
cocaine
than
and patchouli. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, maybe, but also the smell of freedom, baby. We were free in the 70s.
Anyway, so yeah, again, front loading. I love small town monster documentaries. Like I said, this one does feel different from the last couple things they've done, but it does feel very similar to what we're seeing with Eli's work on that. So I am predisposed to like this film. I enjoyed the film. I think sort of as an overall, I enjoyed it, omitting my previous biases. I think it's well done. I liked what they did. Dean, what were you? Please tell me you hated this film so we can wrestle over it.
Well, I'll be honest. I watched it twice because the first time I watched it, and I won't lie, it's not that I was underwhelmed. I just watched so much of this content. And I thought I didn't come away as buzzy about this movie as I normally did. So I watched it again because, again, I have a very, warm place in my heart for Small Town Monsters. And what I walked away with the second viewing was there's some really good stuff in this film. Like the fact that by the end of it, you get Lyle and Redfern, which neither of that's so surprising, and Ken, which is a little more surprising, start to say, well, this whole Dogman thing might just be paranormal. It's not so surprising that Ken says it, but he says it. He starts to talk almost like John Keel. And I've noticed that with Ken in recent years. I think he's who's somebody I respect incredibly, as I do Redfern and Blackburn. But there's something about a cryptozoologist who is comfortable saying, well, this phenomenon here or this thing here doesn't feel like it's flesh and blood. This thing to me feels like it might be something else. When you would kind of really immersed in a zoological interpretation of so many things. Now, of course, I'm being even more of the Keelian or more of the skeptic of flesh and blood reality. Kind of goes, well, if the Dogman aren't real, and the Dogmen act kind of like Bigfoot, and they also kind of act like, fairy sometimes, and they also kind of act like aliens sometimes, then maybe none of this is physically real. But that said, it's nice to see a presentation looking at one of these things at least, because it's the cracks start to begin in the paradigm. This cryptid isn't real. Then why is Bigfoot real? There's some real commonality. So I like that a lot. It's also hilarious watching in some ways. What's the author? He seems like a great young talent who actually wrote the book it's based on. Is it Aaron? What's his name?
I know. I had it written down. And I lost my notes.
It's like, hang on, let me see if I can. No, I have the poster. I thought maybe it's Aaron, right? Is his first name anyway? I don't want to get his last name.
Or is it? Wait, is it Dennis?
It's like Deese or Reese or something. You look it up while I do a blurb.
Yeah.
You look it up while I blurb.
I honestly had everything. Y'all know how bad I am with names. I had this all written down. I really did.
You look it up while I talk. Anyway, well, Aaron seems like a super switch on guy. I need to read the book because the book's great. I mean, I'm sure the book is great because there's going to be an awful lot of
Aaron Deese. Sorry,
Aaron
Deese.
I thought that's what it was. Anyway, it's funny though, because he seems super switched on and super interesting. But whenever he
Yeah.
and Shannon LeGro are interviewing people, I don't know if it's just because it's the angles they took or because Shannon is this just super interviewer and super charismatic. But everybody's always looking at Shannon kind of while they're giving the answers. And Aaron's kind of there just on the side. Not that he's not engaged, it's just there's this kind of, Shannon can just, I think, capture a room. I guess in fairness, Aaron is the author while Shannon is the media personality and the podcaster.
Yeah.
She's an author as well, incidentally. But I found I'm just thinking of the things that hit me when I first watched it. I thought I wouldn't want to have to share a room with Shannon either. She'd be she's very magnetic, I think, so that was kind of cool. The other thing I thought about, and this it's not fair to say this is a criticism of the film, but it's something I wanted them to look at. I'm just like, I hope you do Vidor, Texas properly. I hope you do Vidor, Texas properly. I was telling you, I think recently, or somebody, I actually half wrote a book, which makes me sound like a big failure. So why should I be, criticizing anybody else? But I was half through a book with a co-writer, incredibly talented, and she kind of went AWOL from the entire paranormal community. And so the book just didn't finish getting written. We were about halfway through though. And I think it was a really promising book. I think it was important. And I don't want to go into the details of it because hopefully I will finish the book either alone or hopefully with her one day, because she's a real talent. But that said, one of the chapters I wrote, because we were looking at the broader Fortean realm with a very specific point to prove about very specific cases. I don't want to say any more than that because I think it's such an important book and I don't want to be beaten to the punch. Let's put it that way. But I looked into Vidor because Vidor isn't mentioned that much, the Vidor, Texas case in 1978, when a young couple are kind of, harassed by this werewolf figure. The most interesting point is they call one night for help and the deputy in Vidor comes and sees this bloody thing. Right. And you don't often get law enforcement responding to a dogman attack, and the law enforcement sees the thing as well. Like, this is an important case. And I've heard multiple people I don't think it's had much coverage. Certainly when I did it, I had to go back and dig out original source materials. I think somebody mentioned it to me. It might have been even Lyle. Somebody mentioned, or somebody, maybe one of the Dogman groups, I think maybe mentioned it to me. So I went and had to dig it up, original newspaper sources. But I thought this case is too good to be true. Now, I'm just going to qualify what I'm about to say this way. It was in 1978. There were a few strange sightings like this at the time. It fits the paradigm of what was happening. So I think the Vidor case, which again, they only mention in the movie. I don't know if Aaron looks at it more in his book, but they only mention it in the movie briefly when they're kind of listing some of the big cases. I think Vidor, the word's only said twice in the whole movie, let alone very much about the case. But I thought this case is almost too good to be true because of the sheriff coming or the deputy sheriff coming. It just seemed like this case is crazy. And it was a perfect example for the book. So I had to list this point after I wrote about it. Do you know very much about the town of Vidor?
Honestly, I haven't been there in quite some time. I drove through it when I was early teens. Do you know
anything about do you know what's significant about Vidor? Because I didn't until I dug into it.
No, I don't.
It's the most notorious sundown town in the entire country.
Oh, yes.
But nobody talks about that who mentions this.
Yeah.
So I think it was a legitimate case, but if it's a sundown town, and for people who don't know, that means, and listen, I'm not Mr. Woke. Everybody knows my politics are far more conservative and libertarian, as Jason will tell you. I won't go down the woke trail ever. But I will be objective when objectivity might be needed, particularly when looking into a Fortean type case.
Yep.
If you wanted to scare and keep people that you didn't want in your town, in other words, sundown towns are places where black people weren't welcome after the sun went down, really. It was like, if you're here after the sun comes down, you're in trouble. We don't want you here. Terrible, right? But if you wanted to have a town where people might be scared, what might you do? Could you conceivably start a story about a werewolf in the town that was around after night and trying to get people? Now, I don't think that's what happened here, but I think you have to contextualize that. And you know what?
You need to address that idea.
Absolutely. You know who did this very well in one of his books? Lyle Blackburn. And he says the similar to me. He doesn't think it's the case, but when he was looking at the Falk Monster in his two books on Boggy Creek, the spectacular books, two of the best 40 encrypted books written in the last 30 years. He made the point of, listen, Falk used to be a sundown town. And he said, I think this is legitimate. I don't think this is what happened, but let's at least look at the possibility that, or let's at least admit that, you know, people have considered this as a possibility, which is, I think, all Lyle says, but at least he addresses it. So I think when Vidor is addressed, I think we have to at least throw out the possibility. Is this like Scooby-Doo and the werewolf mask comes out and then there's a clan hood underneath that, and then you rip it off and
exactly, and then it's the sheriff.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think, and that said, I don't think it's the case. A lot of the details ring very true to similar weird dogman encounters, but it's still significant. The most significant thing about Vidor, which to me is one of the most significant pre-Beast of Bray Road werewolf dogman sightings ever reported in the modern United States of America. If the most significant thing about Vidor is it's the most notorious sundown town in the United States of America, then I think it's worth just pausing for a minute and going. Anyway, of course, the documentary doesn't have the space to go there. But when I watched it, I think I asked you even before I watched it, I went, do they talk about Vidor in this? And you were like, I haven't watched it yet either. I'm like, I hope they actually, because I didn't have the time to go out there and research and, you know, knock on doors and say, was there something behind this which you're not telling us? But I mean, I thought, I wonder if they'll get in that aspect of Vidor, because that could be a whole you could do the Vidor story and you could have that as part of the story. I mean, that would be a fantastic.
Well, so to your point, like, I remember, you know, I know about Vidor. I didn't know that it was the most notorious sundown town, but I do know that it was a sundown town. Interesting point. My work as an escrow officer in title, this is one of those things that we still run across from time to time, because a lot of these rules and regulations, particularly with like some of these smaller, more rural, a lot of those things still exist. Just no one does anything with them. Obviously, but they're still technically on the books, and it's weird to be flipping through and you're like, we have to take exceptions to these regulations that's a part of this subdivision. It's like, why are we, and we'll get a call like, why are y'all taking exception to these regulations? And it's like, here it is. And they're like, oh yeah, you can't. Yeah.
By the way, Vidor last time I checked was still a sundown town.
Most of those, that's the thing. Most of those rules still exist. They are still on the books. You know, just people haven't gone through and removed them. For obvious reasons, some for less obvious reasons. Sometimes just, you know, it's easier just to sort of move on and not talk about it. There's a lot of laws in everywhere that are just still on the books because no one does anything with them. Everyone sort of forgets they're there. Some people still remember that they're there, but they choose not to enforce them. But yeah, no, that's you know what? I think you're right. That's an interesting perspective. But here's the thing. Or it's an interesting point to make, because here's the thing. The sundown towns come with histories of, and this is to a point that actually may lend towards a more supernatural connotation for some of these events, because there's a lot of violence that comes along with that idea of a sundown town, including lynchings and beatings, and there is an interesting connection to at least some, you know, supernatural connection to some of these events. And this is not, what I'm about to say is not a complaint or even a knock on the film, because they're not trying to push this idea. They're just exploring the overall concept of Dogman in Texas. So Tex, right? They go through his encounter in this film, and they do a great job of going through it. The thing is, even just a few months ago, I was talking to Tex about this. I'm like, and he mentioned something offhanded about something that happened later. He'd never connected it to his encounter. And again, he's talked about on a number of shows. I've had the conversation with him on a number of shows, so this is all public knowledge. He never connected the story that I'm about to tell you to the Dogman encounter, but I don't see how it isn't, which is that sometime later, he was home alone. Long story short, there was a storm at night, and he saw a man, right, just like a human outline, leaning against a telephone pole that was out sort of at the far end of his yard. And he said the dude, whoever the dude was looking at him. He never moved. He just kind of leaned up against this post. And he could see him because of the light behind him. He's like, he would lean, like every once in a while he'd sort of, you know, change position, but he leaned up against the post and he just sat there watching him for hours.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, so hold on, let me get this straight. He's like, yeah, just look like a normal. He looked like a dude because I couldn't see any detail because of the distance and the dark. I could tell he was there. He was leaning. He does call his friend, but this dude is just standing in the rain at night, looking at his window, looking into his window from a distance. Freaked him out. And I'm like, how did you not connect that to your dog man? He's like, well, it happened later. I'm like, Tex, can we put? You're telling me essentially you have. I mean, it's not technically a shadow person, but this weird shadow person-esque event, sometime after your dogman encounters, and it never crosses your mind that maybe those two things are connected, right? So I bring this all back around to your point about the sundown towns, the violence that a sundown town comes with. I think actually sort of increases the probability of this being somehow of these things being non-physical, not necessarily hauntings per se, but yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a reason to make that connection.
The reason I mentioned it tonight is I think it just should be on the record. I don't think anybody's mentioned Vidor being a sundown town who's written about this. Very few people have. I'm curious if it's in Aaron's book. I did mention it to somebody who's a very high profile researcher in this space, and they knew about the Vidor case. They were quite familiar with it, but they had no idea that Vidor was a sundown town. So I think that sometimes when people are collating old, articles from the 70s out of newspapers talking about these things, they don't worry about looking at what's the context of this town at the time. And I think it's important that we do. That said, talking about Tex's experience with the man in black type, figure, looking into looking at his house sometime after that encounter, it's interesting to see the other aspects of conspiracy and UFO lore appear in the Dogman tale sometimes as well. And I would suggest that somebody who had a more flesh and blood interpretation would take that experience that Tex had after his Dogman sighting of a dark figure watching the house as something to do with government surveillance or something, because we know anybody who's familiar with the land, what is it, the land between the lakes, the LBL beast creature, the idea that there was a family killed by a werewolf in this area. Is it in Kentucky or it's in Tennessee? It's somewhere down there.
It's in Tennessee.
Between lakes, right?
Tennessee. Yeah.
It's very close. It's basically
it's like the Blondes and Boos have been out there, and I'm like, I want to say I can never remember where these things are. This is why I write things down and do shows on things, so I don't have to keep it in my memory. That is really why I started writing books. It was just so I could remember, because I can't keep all this stuff in my head all the time. But like LBL, there's a lot
essentially that story. There's a conspiracy around it that a family were killed, and then essentially the Men in Black or the Werewolf Division come in and cover it up and silence it. This documentary has a similar tale told about a string of disappearances in Texas, and helicopters would fly in and they'd cover up that these people had been murdered by the Dogman. So it was interesting to see, I think, a phenomenon that people like you and I have long suspected. Well, I know I've suspected almost everything is paranormal, right? I know you're certainly open to that interpretation. Gerhard's clearly open to it. Nick Redfern's been saying similar things for ages. Lyle Blackburn's clearly open to this idea. But there's still in that space people who are very flesh and blood, much like the UFO nuts and bolts saucer people who assume that the government must know what's going on and the government must be covering it up. So it's funny to see, we think of this kind of conspiracy mindset of cover up being, at least in the Fortean world, principally a UFO one.
A UFO thing,
that's the whole mythology. But this idea is starting to segue into cryptozoology, and we've seen it even in Bigfoot tales. And this documentary is a classic example of how it's part of the Dogman narrative now.
Yeah, and so on that note, there's actually a thing Tex himself is looking into on his channel, and it's happened several months ago. Actually, I want to answer that Horace's question here in a little bit, because that's a great question. I think
just
it's
saw
actually
you'd
really great.
started. Apologies. I put.
Yeah.
I put.
Oh,
What's
no, you're
that
fine.
star when I clicked on it? I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that. I bet Jason starred that comment. Oh, sorry. Anyway, go, Jason.
Yes. No, I did. It's okay. See, this is why you got to show up to live shows, folks, because you never know what's going to happen. So again, it happened here in Texas. Long story short, a young man who had some history, right? Some troubled history, was killed tragically walking to work. He was taking a shortcut through a wooded area and literally ended up dead, throat ripped out. The police. So here's the thing: they write it off as a big cat. However, the bird and turtle people, that's what I lovingly call them, came out. The Texas Land Management Bureau came out and they looked at it and they said, "There's no evidence of big cat track. There's no evidence of anything." And aside from his throat being torn apart, there's no evidence of predation at all on this body. So to that point, there is this question of, and it does show up like, hey, if there does seem to be instances where the question of whether or not someone is hiding some of these events, right? And it is absolutely showing up in a lot of cryptozoologists' work now. And again, for years, I've been hearing stories of anytime you have these massive wildfires, like why don't we see Bigfoot running out of the on camera with all these other animals? Why aren't they escaping these massive fires? People have talked about Bigfoot bodies either being discovered or injured Bigfoot being seen, but then people showing up and taking the bodies away, or saying we're going to help them medically and they disappear, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you're right. Traditionally, the whole man in black government cover-up idea has been for a long time resigned to UFOs, but it has become a very strong part of cryptozoology, specifically around things like Dogman and Bigfoot. Another weird thing that they talked about in this film that I think is, again, guys, go see the film. You can watch it for free on Tubi. Obviously, you can go and order your own copy, so you don't have to watch it with ads from Seth and
pay to watch it on Prime. I think that's what Small Town Monsters are pushing people to, suggesting that they do go and pay a few bucks, watch it on Prime, and then you don't have to suffer through all those incredibly annoying ads on Tubi. As much as I love Tubi, the ads are annoying.
Yeah. Look, they've got Red Green, the entire Red series on
so good.
I love Red Green. I'm sorry. It's like they've got it on Tubi, so Tubi's now and they've got Babylon 5. It left Max and it's on there. So I'm like, I'm as happy as a clam. I'm like with Tubi. I'm like, you've got Babylon 5 and Red Green. I'm here for it.
You know what I've been watching just quickly? Freevee lately, because Freevee has Project Blue Book, which I've never seen. Finally watching Project Blue Book. That's an aside.
Okay. No, that's I haven't tried Freevee yet. I keep seeing
Prime,
things
I think.
on it.
I think you go to Prime and then you go to Freevee.
Yeah, I've
via
got Prime.
I don't even know. It's through one of those, whatever. Sorry, I cut it.
Yeah.
I do have one other thing in a minute to say about the cover-up as well. But
Swope, Red Green, great show. If y'all haven't seen it, I think it's one of the best shows ever made. It's hilarious. Again, Babylon 5, we'll do a show on it.
Not to be confused with Tom Green, sorry, quickly as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not the same thing. Well, if you want to talk about the cover-up, let's get back to that, because there is one thing that they cover and they address in the documentary that I think is, if you're a Bigfoot enthusiast, you need to address, because we're starting to see that fuzziness around the overall phenomenon. But yeah, go touch on your cover-up idea real quick.
Well, I'm very reluctant to accept that there's a Men in Black, Majestic 12, deep state cover-up of Bigfoot and Dogman. It just seems so silly to me, and I can't see any evidence. That said, I do think that there might be a reason that government organizations like the DNR in Wisconsin, which is, do they have the DNR? Is it the same thing in Texas, like the Department of Natural Resources or whatever?
Yeah. The bird and turtle people. Yeah.
Yeah. The late Linda Godfrey's wonderful documentary, which we premiered in Eau Claire, Wisconsin at the festival I run, Midwest Weird Fest, while she was still with us, called Return to Wildcat Mountain, that looked at sightings of black panthers and other big cats in
Mhm.
Wisconsin, which aren't meant to be here. We're not meant to have black cats. I mean,
Yeah.
nowhere south of the border is meant to have a
Mm-mm.
a black puma type cat running around.
Mm-mm.
There does seem to me to be something which is very believable that the DNR, for whatever reason, not because of any overarching conspiracy, but they seem to want to minimize reports of these things for whatever reason. And Godfrey's documentary seemed to make it quite clear that the DNR were being not aggressive like threatening people, but they seem to have a very
Mhm.
aggressive stance regarding shutting these type of reports down. And that could be
Yeah.
for a number of very, bureaucratic type reasons. They mightn't want people
Mhm.
out there hunting them. They mightn't want to acknowledge it because, then they're failing in their job of protecting other wildlife. Who knows? But I can imagine an agency that doesn't want to dedicate resources to black cat sightings, so playing them down. I can get that.
Yeah.
It's harder to imagine that there's a secret government dogman organization that flies in black helicopters
Mhm.
to do an essentially Men in Black version of Dogman, containment. It just seems like
Yeah.
a stretch. I mean, who knows? I don't know, but
Yeah.
it drifts so far into a paranoid explanation. There's good reason not to trust the government, not to trust the institutions. Believe me of all people will tell you that. But we can take it to a level where there's black helicopters flying in, dropping green berets and shooting the dogmen and stuff. It's like, is there any? Is there like at least the UFO people can go, well, there's kind of proof that at least there was intentional spin on these, UFO sightings. We can
Right.
kind of prove that. I don't know if there's any paper trail at all, or there's any even vague evidence to show that there's a genuine shutdown of
Yeah.
Dogman or Sasquatch witnesses, other than a couple of anecdotal tales from witnesses, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, there's, like you said, there's a few. It's not as universally accepted. Usually, what it ends up being is stuff like, well, we have this account, we can't find any evidence that they claim that law enforcement was involved. Law enforcement doesn't talk about it, therefore there must be some sort of cover up. Again, I'm with you on I can't see a big government thing happening. However, I will say at least this. At this point, it's not even the craziest thing that's happened over the last couple of years. But that being said, I want to bring this back. And I think this actually brings it right back to this event that's mentioned in the film. Unless, of course, the Dogman things, and again, and maybe this extends into some of the Sasquatch encounters also. Unless these aren't necessarily what we think they are, right? To your broader point, these, if again, just because I have to say it every episode because you never know who new is listening. I think there's reason that there is to I think there's solid evidence for reason to speculate there is a biological aspect to the Bigfoot phenomena. But I think that there's another much larger aspect to what we call Bigfoot that may not be Bigfoot at all. If Patterson Gimlin is a Bigfoot, then there may be these other things that aren't. And that may be the bigger component to this, because there is a story that's told of these, again, dogmen running up and slamming their hands on this house. And to anyone who has been in the Bigfoot world for any length of time, that is a standard sort of tactic that I've got friends who've claimed to have seen Bigfoot like entities on their property, and they've described the same thing. Kerry Arnold described something very similar happening to him on one of his hunting trips, right? The late great Kerry Arnold. So this is a common phenomena, and it sort of, my head kind of cocked to the side when they're telling the story. I'm like, well, hold on, you're talking about dogmen, but this is traditionally seen as Sasquatch behavior. So again, you have this weird blurring of the lines, which begs the question of, okay, is it maybe not Bigfoot that's doing these things? Or is that there is this other Keelian paranormal phenomena that is occurring? And maybe we sometimes see it as a Sasquatch, sometimes we see it as a dogman. To your point, maybe sometimes it shows up as a goat man, right? One of the other really big, cryptid events in Texas is the Lake Worth goat man. which most researchers, myself included, sort of see it as a Bigfoot encounter, and even some of the weird aspects of the initial description, right? You could probably chalk up to mange, right? To bacterial mange. But I do have, if I'm going to be honest, there is a reason they called him a goat man at the very beginning, right? But again, this creature was seen by dozens of people in broad daylight all at once, including police officers. That's why that's why this story got as big as it did. So, but again, very early on, there were descriptions of goat men. And I have accounts of people seeing goat human creatures like Pan in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This is not an unknown thing, and people have recounted creatures like that all over the world since the beginning of time, really. Enkidu, the earliest depictions of Enkidu from the Epic of Gilgamesh is as, technically the legs are of a bull, but that seems like a minor, a minor discrepancy given the context. They're still basically the same form. So it's when you see this graying of the phenomena, including the presence, again, starting here in North Texas, and again, it's one of those things that it bothers me about my sighting, right? The creek that I had my encounter in is also, and again, there's a logical reason for it. There really is, but I talk about it in my book. I've got plenty of accounts of Bigfoot being involved in that area, in that creek specifically, for going back to the 1800s. But now I'm starting to hear people talk about dogmen being seen in there. And I'm like, hold up. I can kind of get between why a Bigfoot would be in that creek traveling from, say, the Fort Worth, the Lake Worth area, using that as a highway, because all the creeks and rivers sort of connect in North Texas, using those as highways. I've got no problem with that. It would be the same reason why the pterosaur would be there. But now you're telling me dogmen are showing up. I got problems. And I have other accounts of things not too far away at, AKA Witch Mountain, again, which prominently displays in my book. I have several accounts from numerous people over the last few months of an orb or even other UFO-like phenomena appearing above Witch Mountain and being in that area. I've seen it once with a friend of mine. He's like, dude, are you seeing this? I'm like, yeah, I'm seeing it. He goes, is that? I'm like, yeah, it's definitely not an aircraft, or it's not an airplane. So, there is a lot of overlap with this phenomena that begs some interesting questions that, again, I like to your point, I like the fact that they weren't hiding the fact that Ken, Nick, and Lyle were both like saying, hey, there may be a paranormal, slice to this pie. Mm-hmm. It may not be that there's some giant, dog person running around that's a purely biological entity. There may be something else happening here.
Absolutely. And to give Aaron his dues, towards the end of that documentary, when Shannon makes the point of, well, this is clearly people are having these experiences and seeing these things, Aaron says, well, yeah, some of these things are probably difficult to explain, but some of them probably are misinterpretations of a more sedate kind. So he talks about mange, as you mentioned. He talked about maybe just misidentifications. And when you're listening to the witnesses throughout this show, or throughout this documentary, there's ones which clearly seem to be seeing something which is upright and like a wolf man, but then there are ones like the cowboy who tries to lasso some galloping big wolves. Like, they seem very different to the things which are standing upright and walking around. Another good old Texas boy sees something kind of like a hyena jump his back fence. That again seems like something else. I don't doubt either of those guys because they seem very sincere, but those reports seem very different to something where you see something on two legs, 7 feet tall and growling at you on the side of the road. Like, they just seem to be different things. And again, I think that, and I have to read Aaron's book because I haven't read it, so I can't really comment upon his his skills as a researcher. But that seemed to give me a nugget that, okay, this guy isn't trying to parcel everything in the same little package. So there's something pretty strong about that. Another point I'd like to make talking about Nick Redfern, because this was something I'll forget to do and we're getting close to the end of the show, is this show really does show us why Nick Redfern is one of the top guys in the field. Like Redfern doesn't get anywhere near enough cover. I mean, he's on a lot of shows and things, but Redfern really is perhaps one of the top 40s alive today. I don't know him at all. I've never had any communication with him, but I have a number of his books, and I've always thought very highly of the man. He brings up something that, funnily enough, in that Paws book I never finished, I also brought up in the Werewolf chapter, and that's a story called The Hexam Heads. In the UK in 1971, two boys unearthed, I think they were two wooden heads, and sent them to a local archaeologist or anthropologist. I think her name was Dr. Anne Rice. And then her house started to have weird manifestations of like dogmen on the stairs and things. It was very super weird. And there's a report in Texas where somebody unearths, admittedly a little different because it actually looks like a ceramic dog head or something. The Hexam heads didn't look dog-like at all. But Redfern, who has enough broad understanding of this field, which more people need to do research a little bit beyond, you know, whatever they're really into, he's capable of going, this report here in Texas about somebody unearthing a weird dog little statuette seems an awful lot like the Hexam Head stories in 1971 in the UK. Now, I don't think there's a whole lot of Fordians who would have tied those two puzzles together.
No,
but
100%.
Redfern is so well read. He's able to do what I think more people in this field should be able to do.
I have often commented that he is one of my favorite people working in the field right now because, again, I've had a chance. Again, I know him. We have some very stark differences of opinion, but the thing that I love about Nick is, to your point, he's as well read and as well educated as anyone you're ever going to meet on these subjects. But he also he's not there to sling his overall view. He'll tell you what he finds and what he's told. That's it. He tries to be as non-biased as possible. He's about the facts and context, and you don't get any better than that in this field. Again, I can never praise Nick Redfern enough because we disagree, but I would rather spend time with someone I disagree with who I know who's acting in good faith and is doing the hard work that man does. To your point, I agree. If there's someone that I think we could put on the pedestal of like a Jacques Vallée or a John Keel, it's him. It's Nick Redfern, hands down. But yeah, he makes, I love that point too. Thank you for reminding me about that, because you're right. He makes that connection. I wouldn't have made that connection. Honestly, I don't think I would have. Again, which is why he's such an invaluable member of this community, because when he speaks, people need to listen. You know, it's a really valid point that he's mentioning there. And again, to your point about Aaron mentioning and spending a lot of time, right, on the misidentification possibility for a number of these accounts. Like they're like, look, Texas story, misidentification doesn't work for that. Again, as a Texan, I'm here to tell you, misidentification doesn't work for that at all. But there's several other stories where like, this is not misidentification, but there's others, like to your point, and they're very clear. Maybe this is just misidentification, or maybe it is something else that's weird, but it's not this phenomena weird. It may be something else. Again, you want to talk about a possible. Most people don't realize how big hyenas are. They are massive, massive creatures. Most of them think they're small. They're not. If you were to see one, you'd freak out. And there's a lot of exotic ranches all over Texas, all over. So yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that some of these are misidentifications. Like I said, mange on some black bears. We have black bears in the area, in different places throughout Texas. And, you know, there's always the chance of escaped exotics who've been around for a while. So yeah, I like the fact that they don't just boom, here it is. Here's dogmen. They're all dogmen. And this is our opinion. They're giving you this broad spectrum that you can say, okay, yeah, maybe not everything is, But some of this is really weird, and it's weird enough to entertain a more esoteric interpretation rather than just, for some reason, there's an upright dog walking around.
Yeah, I always remember Linda Godfrey talking about perhaps there was some, because she was very, she was very switched on, open to different interpretations as well, trying to work out if perhaps there could have been some biological explanation why, canines might be able to walk upright through some type of long ongoing genetic, deformation or something. But clearly, I think, as again, to give Ken Gerhard his full dues on this, he does a very eloquent explanation of why this stuff seems to be outside of the scope of cryptozoology. And to be honest, I think the vast majority of cryptids today are outside of any zoological interpretation.
Yeah.
Certainly Dogman, certainly Mothman, certainly Goatman. I mean, Ken makes this point, and it's something I've always thought, how can anybody be looking at these things like there's really a co-evolutionary Dogman somehow out there in the woods that nobody's, shot ever? Like, what on earth? Mind you, I have similar problems with Sasquatch. Anybody knows. How there's Sasquatch in every state in the Union, how there's 8 men running around in every state of the Union, and no good old boy or just, anybody with a gun hasn't brought one down, isn't bringing one down every second day because there's so many dang sightings, staggers my mind. But at least we're seeing cryptozoologists now, like Ken Gerhard's like at the top of his field saying, well, this doesn't seem like a zoological thing to me.
No, there's a reason I considered Ken and Lyle and Nick friends, and it's because I know for a fact they're not charlatans, and they're not going, and they care more about the facts and the truth than even their opinions about it. Which is where I think I sit, you sit, the people we surround ourselves like a lot of us have gone out of our way to find people who care more about the facts and the truth than their own opinion of it, and are willing to change their opinions on a given subject because of what the evidence actually leads you towards. And again, it's why I'm glad Seth and them have over at Small Town Monsters have latched on to them, because there is no finer group of researchers working today to have on your side to give you the facts than these three.
And they're all Texans, just like you. What is it about the great state of Texas?
Well, okay, so Nick technically isn't a Texan. He is British, but you know what? I'll claim him.
Well, he lives in Texas, right?
Yeah. He does. Oh, yeah.
Texan.
Yeah.
Then, man.
No, he lives not too far from me, actually. Same thing with Lyle. They're all in
David Bowie and or rather Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett. None of those guys were born in Texas, but they're more Texan than, I don't know, Texan toast or Texas toast or whatever you guys have down there.
Yeah, Texas toast. I mean,
maybe
that's
Redfern, Texas, and Texan toast now as well.
Yeah. Well, he still eats scones, so.
Not quite as Texan as you.
Not quite as Texan. No, he does. I'm not kidding. He will at conferences. He'll have his own little thing, and he'll make a proper cup of tea for his scones. I'm not kidding. I was like, "Is that a scone?" He's like, "Yep. That's." He's like, "Yeah, those are scones." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna have to give you crap for that, but I'm
gonna cut in real quick because Horace had another great question, but you had a point you were going to get to of his before.
Well,
Horace, I'm going to answer this real quick, then I'll let you answer the big one. Because he says, what does zoologists say about the mechanics of dogman motion, given the way their legs are often drawn? I think that makes people like, we're talking about the people who are more switched on within the community go, this thing probably isn't physical. But I know you wanted to hit on an earlier point from Horace. So
let's talk about because I want to end on horses on the question I started. Because I do have a half-hearted answer to that one. But yeah, for this one, this is a really interesting one, because here's the thing. There's a lot of argument in the community as to whether or not they do have digitrade legs or if they have human legs. Because here's the thing. There are accounts of dogmen having more human-like proportions to their legs. In fact, Texas...
Just quickly, you know who the people who see those are the people who were never indoctrinated by watching The Howling and other horror movies. It's a cultural phenomenon. That's your answer, Horace. The people who've seen The Howling and other movies, when they see these things, they go, that's what we saw when the horror movie showed us. Sorry, Jason. Continue.
Well, yeah, no, that may be as valid an interpretation as anything else. I'm the first one, again, as the artist, to say, if you're unfamiliar with something, when the first time you see it, you don't actually see it. Your brain is trying to figure out what it's looking, because you don't really see things. Like, this is the great myth. We don't actually see things. Our brain is interpreting everything you see. That's why magic works, right? Illusions. That's why optical illusions work. It's because your brain is trying to compensate. And so, yeah, assumptions like, well, if it's a werewolf in their head, they're subconscious, like, well, it's a werewolf. It kind of fits in that. So then it must look like the things I've been exposed to. There's plenty of accounts of people seeing them have more human-like legs. And again, Tex, I was doing some artwork for his merch, and we actually drew out his Dogman. And in fact, there's his own personal drawing of the Dogman is in the documentary. He doesn't interpret he gives it sort of a Digitrade look, but he's not interpreting it as a dog's leg. He interprets it as it was like it was a human leg, that the foot was really long, but it was sort of running on the balls of its feet, right? A lot of us, if you spend any time in martial arts, you learn to walk on the balls of your feet for a lot of reasons. His interpretation, a lot of researchers do say that the mechanics of the Dogman leg is not Digitrade, but rather something more human-like. However, there are a lot of researchers who will just say, yeah, they look like dogs and they have dog-like legs. To be honest, they don't have a good answer for that, because a lot of us have pointed out, hey, if they were doing that, they wouldn't be able to bear this huge amount of weight. And so there's a lot of controversy. My problem is, going back to your original point, I have accounts of dogmen with goat legs that the eyewitness said it has hooves. They were very clear about it having hooves. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do with that? Right? What do you do with that if it's supposed to be a dog man? So yeah, to Horace's point, there's some controversy as to how their legs are actually shaped and what the arguments are. Unfortunately, a lot of people who take after the more Digitrade interpretation, they just sort of wipe over that fact, because a lot of us have pointed out a canine foot would be terrible for bipedal locomotion.
I think all of these problems
disappear
by the way when you throw off a flesh and blood zoological interpretation. If you get to a space where you suspect that almost all of this is either misidentification or something paranormal, then a lot of those things about the physical reality no longer matter. They don't matter to me, because almost everything I see in this space, which I think of as a genuine, accurate report, is probably somebody interacting with a more anomalous other than just a hairy critter that lives in the woods.
No, and I would, again, to your point, I would agree with that. That if it's a non-biological entity, then yeah, science is out the window. In fact, Donnie, our friend Donnie, one of the things one of the first interviews I had him on my show when we were still on Texas Front Porch, he had a great question, which was early on, like the early 2000s, when the Dogman phenomenon was really becoming popularized. Because again, before that, no one talked about it. He noted that a lot of something that happened very, very early on is people talked about hearing their hips crack when they would go from bipedal to quadrupedal, or from quadrupedal to bipedal. People talked about hearing their hips pop into place or whatever, right?
And seen Howling or American Wolf in London is why they do the sound effects.
Well, that's sort of that's why I mention it, is no one talks about that anymore. You can go back and listen to old to old broadcasts of Coast to Coast, and they'd say, yeah, I was close enough to hear their legs pop when they would. And this was a very prominent thing discussed, but it completely disappeared by like 2012, 2015. Isn't it weird that it's 2012, 2013, but then it's 2012, but then it's 2015? Like at some point it's like everything before 2012, it's 2000 and this, and then but it's after 12, it's like 20, and then the digits that follow, 2023, 2020. I have ADOS, attention deficit, shiny. But back to the point, it's like, which I think goes back to your point of, this was a very prominent feature of the phenomena in the literature, in the conversation, that it absolutely disappears and it's never mentioned again.
Well,
No
we no
one's
longer,
following up on it.
you know why? We no longer talk about them being shapeshifters that often. I mean, it still appears occasionally, but these things have taken on within the Fortean community or the cryptozoological community. They've become other creatures like a Bigfoot, right? Nobody back then, everybody had to almost contextualize these as werewolves, as shapeshifters, because that's what Hollywood had taught us to imagine that these things were. Now, while they still often present the way we see the werewolf appear once the man's turned into the wolf, the whole expectation of it having to be a man transformed seems to be so far in the distance now that there's no need to hear these Rick Baker effect, or at least audio effects that go with the Rick Baker special effects artist when he makes the legs pop around the other way, right? So now it's just like these things roam like this all the time. So there's no expectation for there to be a hip crack or a leg crack when they transform.
Yeah, and that's, again, it goes back to, this is a phenomenon that was a major part of this whole conversation, but then it just completely disappears. And to your point, it may be because of the age of the people encountering the phenomenon. You know, a lot of these people had grown up, they'd seen The Howling, they'd seen these other films where that was a prominent feature. And so you could argue maybe it was a psychological thing. They just sort of expected it. Or it could just be that if this is part of a larger, and this is your point, this is part of a larger paranormal phenomena, that our beliefs, our expectations, our understandings of the world could literally recreate with how some of these creatures appear. Again, why is it that I have dogmen and Bigfoot showing up in the exact same creek?
Because they're the same thing. That's why.
There you go.
And it's not that one of them is an ape man and the other one's really an ape man and we think it's really a werewolf. It's because they're both the same phenomenon at the root cause and it's projecting in different ways. At least that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. Well, it's the same question of, well, where's a Bigfoot or a dogman when you're not seeing it? Same thing with UFOs. Where are the UFOs when you don't see them? That's sort of the bigger question here. Again, go watch the video, go watch the film. It's a great film. They ask these questions in a lot of in ways that a lot of people don't, right? That a lot of people aren't going to ask these questions. They're not going to address these questions. And that's why we love Nick. That's why we love Ken. That's why we love Lyle. That's why we love Tex. That's why we love Seth Breedlove and his team over at
Shannon too.
Shannon and Aaron. Yeah. And again, and Aaron, but Seth and them over at Small Town Monsters is why we love them. They don't shrink away from the hard questions for their documentaries. They're not here to shell or shill for an idea. They're here to give you the facts as they can get them. And I love it. Love it. So to Horace's earlier question that I love.
Can I just say what the question is?
Yeah, please. Please.
Horace's question was...
No. I want you to read it. I
didn't know you were going to. I thought we both make the mistake of sometimes answering questions and then the people, without saying what it is, the audio listeners then are going, what the heck are they talking about? So Horace Smith asked, on a lighter note, why do anomalous events like to appear in triangles as opposed to, say, circles? Good question.
Because triangles are far scarier. I'm just saying, have you ever been scared by a circle? I never have. I'm often terrified by triangles, though.
And of course,
like I can never go to Egypt. Just giant triangles everywhere.
And of course, it's also easy to just get 3 points and then join them and say everything in them.
And
that's Horace's point.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Oh no, that's exactly what it is, right? It's just there's 3 points. And again, so here's the thing: they mentioned 3 very specific cities, like the Dallas-Fort Worth area, San Antonio. Well, here's the thing, though. On a serious note, that is why it is. It's 3 identifiable points. But if you look at a lot of those points, it's like, well, the things are sort of outside of those cities. Like it's not inside the triangles. They're technically outside the points because Texas is a hard place to live in. All right, I love Texas, but I'm the first one to say the most habitable regions are deep East Texas and then down around the coast, right? Everywhere else, and again, North Texas is a little bit easier. That's where I live. But by and large, Texas is a hard place to live in. So your major cities are essentially basically right off of I-45 and I-35. Most of your major cities are, which is again, Dallas-Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, they're all off of I-35 or I-45, and I-45 and I-35 meet and become one highway. So that's hence the triangle. So that's why.
And you know what else I think too? I think that because the Bermuda Triangle was such a potent
Yeah.
idea in the occult, 40 and paranormal world,
Oh, I agree.
for some
100%.
reason, people have traveled
Mhm.
going forward, trying to find locations which somehow echo this triangle. And I
Yeah.
think there's a Great Lakes Triangle. There's obviously the Alaska Triangle, which of course
Yep.
Ken Gerhard appears in Missing in Alaska, which is one of my daughter's favorite shows. That and Monster Quest she adores.
I love
When we
that show.
When we
I
were
really
watching
do.
this, I'm like, "Who's that?" "That's Ken Gerhard." "Who's that?" "That's Lyle Blackburn." I'm like, "You're pretty good for a 7-year-old. You know all these people already."
Exactly. Hey, you're raising her right. That's all I can say. There's also the Dragon's Triangle in off the coast of Japan.
Oh, there's a bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now there's
Like you said,
there's
it's a
there's
scary
the Dogman Triangle now as well, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's never a there's never a pterosaur parallelogram, right? It's always
there should be. It's up to you to
there
write
should
that
be.
book.
Well, but then I have to find I have to find some way of making a parallelogram or a decahedron or something.
Mind you, if you wrote something titled the Pterosaur Triangle, it would sell an awful lot better.
Yeah, yeah, it would. Well, so there you go. I got to find a way to make it a triangle now. Actually, I probably could.
Find three sightings anywhere on the planet, and there'll probably be a triangle. So it's
exactly. It's like it's like, but hold on, you're skipping the stuff you're saying is happening in Michigan. Michigan's not a part of the triangle. That's a completely different phenomena.
That's the Michigan Pterosaur Triangle.
Yeah, exactly. I probably could make a triangle out of the sightings. No lie, I probably could. So I'll talk to my other roping friends about that. My pterosaur friends. We'll find a way to make that happen. Although the parallelogram would be a heck of a lot of fun. So
won't sell as well. Just saying.
Yeah, people are like, why are you bringing math into this? Because math is the language of the universe, and you think cryptozoology is not afraid of other shapes?
No, just other more objective explanations. That's all they're afraid of.
You're just trying to start crap, aren't you now?
Pretty much. It's my job as the contrarian.
And you take that job very seriously, which is why I love you, and that's why we love all of y'all who are here to listen to the insanity that this show has. Again, final words: go watch this film. If you can go watch it on Prime, you can rent it, you can buy it. I think you can go to their website and buy it from there, or you can watch it with advertisements on Tubi. If you don't have a lot of free shekels at the moment, I know times are hard out there for a lot of people, and if you want to drop some, so you're like, no, I'm too busy buying, super stickers on Untold Radio AM. We understand. We completely understand. So yeah, that's why Tubi's there. But again, go see this movie. It's the Dogman Triangle. Tex. This is not the first documentary Tex is in, but this is definitely the first This is the first Small Town Monsters documentary that Tex is in. Go give it a watch. Again, it's a great show. Aaron and Shannon did a great job on this. Aaron was the author of the original book. They do a great job on this. This is an excellent thing to watch, and I had a great time.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I'm glad I watched it twice because I'm so jaded. Sometimes I have to rewatch things. On the second viewing, I was like, no, I'm really glad that I rewound. There's some stuff in there of incredible value that you would never, ever, ever see on a network show. You'd never get people like Ken Gerhard saying, this might not be physical monsters. This might be a tulpa or something. I mean, where do you hear that on network television? Watch Small Town Monsters before you watch something more mainstream, because you're more likely to at least hear objective or more insightful interpretations by people who really do care about this type of material. Yeah,
100%. 100%. And honestly, I didn't feel the length. Like, I know there's some shows, and we've talked about them on this. There's some documentaries that you're watching and you're like, I feel every bloody second of this film. You don't feel the time on this. This is when I was like, wait, it's over? Like, we're done with this? This was great. Again, it's great. Go watch it. speaking of greatness, we'll be back next week. Same Mysterious Library time, same Mysterious Library channel. So we'll catch y'all then behind the card catalog. Good night, everybody.